What if I told you that one of the most powerful brands in the world, the one that dominates sports arenas, sneaker culture, and even the way we think about victory itself, began with a handshake in a dingy garage, a couple of running shoes, and two men who had no idea what monster they were about to unleash? Nike wasn't born from a billion-dollar investment or a team of marketing geniuses in glass skyscrapers. It began with doubt, sweat, and an almost reckless belief that something better was possible. And what followed would change not just sports, but global culture. But before we dive into the rise of this empire, take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe. It's just 2 clicks, and it helps me keep bringing you stories like this one. In the early 1960s, a young runner named Phil Knight was restless. He had just finished his MBA at Stanford, and he wasn't exactly sure what path his life would take. But during one of his classes, he had written a paper that would shape everything. His idea was simple, maybe even crazy. What if high-quality running shoes could be produced in Japan at a fraction of the price of German brands like Adidas and Puma, which were dominating the market? Japan at the time was just beginning its post-war industrial boom, producing cameras and cars that were cheaper and sometimes better than their Western counterparts. Why not shoes? Knight called it his crazy idea. And like most ideas that change the world, it started small, with a mix of obsession and uncertainty. But Phil wasn't an athlete-turned-entrepreneur by accident. Running was in his blood. He had run track under the legendary coach Bill Bowerman at the University of Oregon. Bowerman wasn't just a coach, he was a tinkerer, a man obsessed with shaving milliseconds off his athletes' times. He'd slice open shoes, glue on new soles, try strange materials, all in the name of performance. He was the type of person who saw limitations as invitations. If the market didn't have the perfect shoe, why not make one? Knight and Bowerman were opposites in many ways. Knight was shy, analytical, cautious, with a kind of quiet intensity. Bowerman was fiery, demanding, endlessly curious, but their differences made them the perfect duo. In 1964, the two shook hands and formed Blue Ribbon Sports. Their headquarters? The trunk of Knight's Plymouth Valiant, where he sold shoes at track meets out of cardboard boxes. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't even sustainable, but it was the beginning. The shoes themselves weren't even theirs yet. Knight had traveled to Japan and struck a deal with a company called Onitsuka Tiger, known today as ASICS, to distribute their running shoes in the United States. For years, Blue Ribbon Sports was basically a middleman, bringing in Japanese shoes and trying to convince skeptical American runners to give them a chance. They had no advertising budget, no stores, no real infrastructure. What they had was grit, persistence, and Bowerman's relentless drive to improve the product. But every empire has its moment of fracture, the point where survival depends on risk. For Blue Ribbon, that moment came in the early 1970s. Their relationship with Onitsuka soured. Contracts were broken, lawsuits filed. The company was hanging by a thread. If they lost their supply, they lost everything. And that's when the crazy idea evolved into something bigger. Instead of just selling someone else's shoes, why not create their own? Why not build something new from scratch? It was terrifying. They had no factories, no money, no global presence, but they had necessity. And necessity often gives birth to invention. They decided to launch their own brand. The name? At first they wanted to call it Dimension 6, a name so bland and awkward that even Knight hated it. Thankfully, an employee suggested something else. Nike, after the Greek goddess of victory. Knight wasn't thrilled, but he agreed. Sometimes fate sneaks in quietly, almost reluctantly, and changes everything. The first Nike shoes weren't perfect. The designs were rough, the brand unknown. But Bowerman had a trick up his sleeve. One morning, looking at his wife's waffle iron, he thought, what if the grooves of the waffle pattern could grip the track better, provide more traction, and make runners faster? He poured rubber into the iron, nearly ruining the kitchen. But what emerged was revolutionary: the waffle sole. It became the foundation of Nike's first real innovation, and it showed athletes that this wasn't just another copycat shoe. It was something new, something designed to win. Still, great products don't sell themselves. They needed an identity, a face, a symbol. That's where one of the most iconic pieces of branding in history came in. A young graphic design student named Carolyn Davidson was asked to create a logo. She charged just $35. What she came up with was a simple swoosh, meant to represent movement and speed. Knight wasn't blown away. In fact, he said, "I don't love it, but it will grow on me." And grow it did. That little swoosh would eventually be worth billions. But logos and soles weren't enough. Nike needed stories, athletes, and culture. This is where the company became something more than a shoe manufacturer. They understood that people don't just buy sneakers, they buy identity, aspiration, the idea of being part of something greater. And Nike was about to find its voice. One of their first big breaks came in the running boom of the 1970s. America was catching on to jogging, fitness, and self-improvement. Suddenly, running wasn't just for athletes. It was for everyone. Nike shoes fit perfectly into that cultural wave. They weren't just selling footwear. They were selling a lifestyle, a statement. You're someone who pushes limits, someone who doesn't settle. And yet, their true transformation into a global powerhouse would come with a single partnership. In 1984, Nike took the biggest gamble in sports marketing history. At the time, they were struggling against Adidas and Converse, who had the majority of the basketball market. Nike was considered more of a running brand. But then came a rookie named Michael Jordan. Nike's pitch to Jordan was audacious. Instead of offering just another shoe deal, they wanted to build an entire line around him. His own shoe, his own identity. At first, Jordan wasn't interested. He wanted Adidas. Converse had the legends like Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. Nike was the underdog. But eventually, the offer was too good to refuse. A $2.5 million contract over 5 years, plus royalties, plus the creation of the Air Jordan brand. It was unprecedented. The first Air Jordans hit the court in 1985 and controversy exploded. The NBA banned them for not meeting uniform standards. But Nike saw opportunity in rebellion. They ran ads saying the NBA had banned the shoe, but fortunately, the NBA can't stop you from wearing them. That campaign turned a penalty into myth, and the shoes sold out instantly. It wasn't just a product anymore. It was a movement. Nike had discovered the formula. Culture plus controversy plus athletes equals dominance. With Jordan, they didn't just capture basketball. They captured youth, music, fashion, and identity. Sneakers became symbols, not just accessories. And Nike knew how to fuel the fire. But their dominance didn't stop there. They began signing more athletes, telling more stories. Tennis star John McEnroe wore their shoes while smashing rackets and rebelling against the establishment. Later, athletes like Tiger Woods, Serena Williams, and Cristiano Ronaldo would join the roster. Nike wasn't just following sports. They were shaping them, turning individuals into icons, and weaving their stories into the fabric of the brand. And then, in 1988, came the 3 words that cemented Nike's place in history. Just do it. Simple, raw, universal. The slogan was inspired by the last words of a convicted criminal facing execution, oddly enough, but Nike transformed it into a call to action for everyone. Whether you were a pro athlete or just someone trying to get off the couch, "Just do it" spoke directly to you. It was motivation distilled into 3 syllables. And it worked. Sales skyrocketed, and Nike became the largest sports brand in the world. By the early 1990s, Nike wasn't just a company. It was a cultural force. Their swoosh was everywhere. On basketball courts, running tracks, playgrounds, billboards, and even in rap videos. Kids weren't just wearing Nike because they needed shoes. They wore Nike because it meant something. It was a badge of identity, of belonging to a tribe that celebrated speed, power, and ambition. But success never comes without shadows, and Nike was about to learn that even empires can be fragile. As Nike expanded, so did scrutiny. Critics began pointing to the factories overseas where Nike products were being made. Reports emerged about harsh working conditions, low wages, and what many described as sweatshops. For a brand that had built itself on inspiration and empowerment, this was a devastating contradiction. How could a company urging the world to just do it be accused of exploiting the very workers who made its products? The backlash in the mid-1990s was intense. Protests erupted. Articles and documentaries painted Nike as the face of corporate greed. For the first time, Nike's pristine image was cracked. Phil Knight himself would later call it the darkest time in Nike's history. In 1998, he gave a speech admitting the company had failed to live up to its own values. He promised reforms, higher factory standards, independent monitoring, and more transparency. It wasn't easy, and the accusations would linger for years, but Nike began the slow process of regaining trust. This moment became a lesson. Even the strongest brands must face accountability. The swoosh had been tarnished, but not destroyed. At the same time, Nike's marketing machine kept pushing forward, finding new ways to dominate culture. They realized something powerful. Their real product wasn't just shoes, or even athletes. It was stories. The underdog who defied the odds, the champion who pushed through pain, the ordinary person who achieved something extraordinary. Nike wasn't selling sneakers, they were selling possibility. Nowhere was this clearer than with their deepening relationship with Michael Jordan. By the mid-90s, Air Jordans weren't just popular, they were legendary. Entire subcultures formed around collecting them. Lines wrapped around blocks when new models dropped. People were willing to pay hundreds, even thousands, just to own a pair. And with Jordan's dominance on the court, the myth only grew. When he hit the shot against Cleveland in 1989, when he returned from retirement and scored 55 points against the Knicks, when he sealed his 6th championship, every moment wasn't just a sporting event, it was an advertisement. Nike's genius was in making sure that every highlight fed into the story of the brand. But Jordan couldn't last forever, and Nike knew it. They needed the next wave of icons, the athletes who would carry the torch into a new century. That's where players like Kobe Bryant and LeBron James came in. Nike signed them early, investing in futures that seemed uncertain but promising. And once again, the gamble paid off. Kobe's relentless drive and LeBron's almost superhuman presence gave Nike new legends to build around. Yet Nike's influence wasn't limited to basketball. They expanded into soccer, signing global stars like Ronaldinho, Ronaldo Nazario, and later Cristiano Ronaldo. For a company that had started with a handful of running shoes in a car trunk, they were now battling Adidas on the world's biggest stage, the FIFA World Cup. And they didn't just show up, they dominated. Their commercials were cinematic, filled with swagger, music, and style that appealed as much to teenagers in New York as to kids kicking a ball on the streets of Rio. But Nike wasn't just attaching itself to stars. It was redefining how people thought about sports. One of their most powerful campaigns didn't feature world champions at all. It was about ordinary people, those who ran in the dark before work, those who played pickup games with friends, those who struggled, sweated, and pushed themselves with no cameras watching. Nike told them, "You matter too. You're an athlete too." That message resonated deeply. It wasn't about being Michael Jordan, it was about being you at your best. And then came a revolution: technology. As the 2000s unfolded, Nike saw that the future wasn't just about making shoes, but about connecting with consumers in entirely new ways. They partnered with Apple to launch Nike Plus, a device that let runners track their mileage and pace. It seems simple today, in an age where every phone tracks every step. But at the time, it was groundbreaking. It showed that Nike wasn't just about the past or even the present. They were willing to shape the future. But every empire faces challengers. By the 2010s, Adidas was making a comeback, fueled by collaborations with music stars like Kanye West and their Boost technology that captured sneaker culture. Under Armour, once an underdog, was growing fast by signing athletes like Steph Curry. Suddenly, Nike's dominance didn't look untouchable. The sneaker wars were heating up again. Nike responded the way it always had, by doubling down on boldness. They leaned harder into storytelling, into cultural moments, into risk. One of the most controversial came in 2018, when they launched a campaign featuring NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick, who had become a polarizing figure after kneeling during the national anthem in protest against racial injustice. The ad declared, "Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything." Some praised it as courageous. Others called for boycotts, even burning their Nike shoes in protest. But Nike knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't afraid to divide opinion because division meant attention, and attention meant relevance. Sales, in fact, surged. The swoosh was not just a logo, it was a statement. And behind the scenes, Nike continued to innovate. They introduced Flyknit, a lightweight sustainable material that reduced waste. They invested in recycling and sustainability initiatives, understanding that the future of sportswear would be as much about responsibility as performance. They poured money into research labs, testing how shoes could help athletes run faster, jump higher, push boundaries once thought impossible. The line between athlete and product blurred. Was the shoe helping the runner, or was the runner proving the shoe? That question only fueled more debate, more mystique. Think about Eliud Kipchoge, the Kenyan marathoner who broke the 2-hour barrier in 2019, wearing a pair of Nike's highly engineered running shoes. Purists argued the shoes gave an unfair advantage. Supporters said it was innovation. Either way, everyone was talking about Nike again. The story wasn't just about a man breaking limits. It was about the swoosh being there when history was made. At the same time, Nike mastered another front: fashion. Sneakers weren't just for athletes anymore. They were for musicians, artists, influencers. Collaborations with designers like Virgil Abloh and brands like Off-White turned limited edition Nike shoes into works of art. People camped outside stores for days just to get a pair. Resale markets exploded. Sneakers once made for running tracks now sold for tens of thousands of dollars at auctions. Nike wasn't just part of sports, it was part of culture, part of status, part of identity. And yet through all of this, one thing never changed: Nike's ability to make you feel. Their ads still give goosebumps. Their stories still pull at something deep inside, that universal human drive to push harder, go further, overcome. That's the secret. Shoes wear out. Fashions change. Technology evolves. But the human need for inspiration, for belief, for victory, that never fades. Nike knew this from the beginning, back when Knight sold shoes from his car and Bowerman ruined a waffle iron. Still, if you zoom out, Nike's story isn't just about shoes or sports. It's about vision, risk, resilience, and the strange alchemy of culture. It's about two men who bet everything on a crazy idea and ended up building a company worth billions. But it's also about how fragile success can be, how quickly the tide can turn, how every empire must fight to stay relevant. And even now, with all their success, Nike faces new challenges. Rivals are hungrier than ever. Consumers demand more authenticity, more responsibility, more meaning. Social media can turn a brand hero into a villain overnight. And the next generation isn't loyal by default. They have choices, voices, and platforms of their own. Nike's future will depend on whether it can keep doing what it has always done: evolve, inspire, and stay one step ahead. But if history is any indication, they'll find a way. Because Nike has never been just about products. They've been about something bigger. The idea that inside each of us is an athlete, a fighter, a dreamer. And all it takes is a spark, a moment. By now, Nike isn't just a brand. It's a lens through which we can study ambition, culture, and human behavior. Every ad, every product launch, every collaboration tells a story about what people want to believe about themselves. But the deeper lesson isn't just marketing genius. It is about understanding people at a fundamental level. Nike understood that emotion drives action, that identity drives loyalty, and that stories have the power to transform ordinary objects into symbols of aspiration. Consider the simple act of lacing up a pair of Nikes. It's mundane, almost trivial. Yet millions of people do it each day and feel something: confidence, readiness, possibility. That's not magic. It's deliberate design, both in product and narrative. From Bowerman's waffle iron to the Air Jordan phenomenon, Nike has shown an uncanny ability to connect innovation with meaning. The shoes are functional, yes, but they also carry weight far beyond leather and rubber. They carry belief. And this is where Nike's true brilliance lies. They recognize that a product alone isn't enough. Without culture, without emotion, without story, a shoe is just a shoe. Nike fused performance with mythology. They made people see themselves as part of a movement, whether that movement was breaking a personal record, winning a championship, or expressing identity through street fashion. Their campaigns didn't just sell sneakers, they sold the promise of transformation. But this rise hasn't been smooth. Nike's story is as much about struggle as triumph. From legal battles with Onitsuka Tiger to criticism over labor practices, from the pressure of staying ahead of rivals to managing public perception during controversies, Nike has faced constant tests. And yet, what stands out is their resilience. They never stopped pushing boundaries, never stopped innovating, never stopped telling compelling stories. They adapted, sometimes painfully, sometimes controversially, but always with an eye on the horizon. Take, for instance, the shift toward digital and sustainability. Nike saw that the world was changing. Consumers wanted more than products. They wanted experiences, values, and accountability. Nike adapted, creating digital platforms like Nike Training Club, running apps, and virtual communities that make engagement as important as sales. They invested in sustainable materials, reimagined supply chains, and embraced a new generation's concern for ethics and the planet. In doing so, they maintained relevance while staying true to their core, empowering human potential. And let's not forget the subtle art of timing and psychology that Nike mastered. Controversy, scarcity, and aspiration became tools, not accidents. Every limited edition sneaker drop creates anticipation. Every campaign featuring athletes like Serena Williams or LeBron James taps into aspiration and admiration. Nike understands that desire is emotional first and logical second. You don't buy a story because it's cheap. You buy it because it makes you feel seen, inspired, and part of something bigger. Analyzing Nike's journey reveals patterns that extend beyond business. It's about the interplay of risk, creativity, and culture. It's about understanding that vision without execution is just imagination, and execution without resonance is empty. Nike's leaders took constant, calculated risks, investing in unproven athletes, entering controversial social debates, experimenting with product technologies that could fail spectacularly. And in doing so, they built a brand that doesn't just respond to culture, it shapes it. The story also illustrates the power of collaboration and partnership. Knight and Bowerman couldn't have done it alone. The designers, the athletes, the marketers, even the factory workers all played a role. A billion-dollar brand doesn't emerge from isolation. It grows from networks, relationships, and the ability to recognize talent and opportunity when others overlook it. It's a reminder that even visionary leaders succeed through collective effort, and that humility paired with ambition can move mountains. Nike's evolution also teaches us about storytelling's impact on perception. People remember stories, not spreadsheets. They remember a young Michael Jordan soaring through the air in red and black Air Jordans, not the quarterly earnings report behind his contract. They remember the defiant, "Just Do It" campaigns, not the internal meetings where the slogan was debated. Nike leveraged narrative as a bridge between aspiration and action. They didn't just want people to buy shoes. They wanted people to see themselves as faster, stronger, bolder. And yet, amid all this, there's a paradox. Nike's power is tied to imperfection. Its origin story, a garage, a car trunk, a crazy idea, reminds us that greatness often begins in humble, uncertain circumstances. Knight and Bowerman were not infallible. They faced failure repeatedly, and without persistence, insight, and a willingness to learn, Nike might have vanished into obscurity. This is a lesson beyond business. The most enduring success often comes from embracing risk, learning from missteps, and daring to imagine what others dismiss. By tracing Nike's path, one can see the interplay between innovation and timing, risk and reward, culture and product. It's a blueprint for understanding not just business success, but influence and legacy. Nike didn't merely sell sneakers, they sold stories of human potential. They created a shared mythology that continues to evolve, inspiring millions across generations. The brand became bigger than the sum of its products, bigger than the athletes, bigger than the market itself. It became an idea: victory, perseverance, aspiration, realized in rubber, leather, and narrative. So what can we take away from this journey? First, that vision is powerful, but only when paired with relentless execution. Second, that culture drives impact more than product alone. Third, that resilience and adaptation are non-negotiable in a world that never stops changing. And finally, that the smallest sparks, a handshake in a garage, a waffle iron, a simple swoosh, can ignite movements that reshape industries and inspire billions. Nike's story isn't finished. Every generation brings new athletes, new consumers, new challenges. But if the past is any guide, Nike will continue to push boundaries, challenge assumptions, and turn obstacles into opportunities. From the trunk of a car